Welcome back. Today I'll be going over chapter 16 of Ginger Alden's book, Elvis and Ginger. Ginger says after a week in Palm Springs, Elvis was ready to go home. They boarded the Lisa Marie to find engine trouble and no interior lights. In the dark plane, she and Rosemary followed Elvis to the back where the three of them sat together at the conference table. The lights came on and Elvis looked shocked. He had accidentally grabbed and held Rosemary's hand in the dark. Elvis said, "Good God, Ginger, where are you?" And then he grabbed Ginger's hand. So why didn't Rosemary say something when Elvis grabbed her hand? I mean, clearly he had to have had bigger hands than Ginger, right? Was it normal to have your boyfriend hold your sister's hand back then? Anyway, they settled in the bedroom, and when the plane took off, Ginger says Elvis told her she needed her own bedroom and her own private phone line. He also said, quote, "I don't like it that you have to drive so far to see me. I'd like you to have a home closer to Graceland." Ginger says, quote, "Elvis knew that I lived with my family, so I didn't think he was suggesting that I leave them to buy a home closer to Graceland for me to live in alone. This must mean that he was talking about a new home for my entire family. This idea was so over the top that I found it difficult to digest." You know what's over the top? Your boyfriend casually mentioning that he would like you to live closer to his house, and then you understanding that to mean he wants to buy my entire family a new house. That's wild. I wonder if at any point after this conversation she said to him, "Oh, Elvis, I can't believe you want to buy my family a house." And Elvis is like, "A what now?" Anyway, Ginger says Elvis changed the topic before she could respond, and she attributed this sudden change in topic to Elvis occasionally running through a bunch of different thoughts in his head. When they got back to Memphis, Elvis gave Ginger a Smith & Wesson 22-32 kit gun for protection. She said that this didn't surprise her because she knew he loved to collect guns and had quite a few of them. He told her to keep the gun in her car when she drove back, drove back and forth from home to Graceland. Ginger says Elvis understood something that she hadn't realized yet. Her life had shifted into his world where bodyguards were a necessity because danger or unexpected threats could come from anywhere. Ginger says she could see how protective he was of her. She says months later she saw a strange man parked outside her house and mentioned it to Elvis when he called at that moment, that it might be a reporter. Furious, Elvis said, "I'm coming over and I will smash his goddamn lens out." Elvis showed up moments later in his Ferrari, but the car was already gone by then. So he simply visited and took her sister Terry out for a ride in the Ferrari. Back home, Ginger could now shop for Elvis's birthday present. Remembering that he had a monkey named Scatter, she bought him a statue of a monkey holding a candle. She also bought a big mirror that had the outline of Elvis's face etched on it. She says, quote, "Elvis was tickled by the gifts. He placed the monkey on a shelf in his bedroom and propped the mirror against the wall. They would remain in those places throughout the rest of his life." Ginger says they resumed their usual lifestyle of holing up in his bedroom, reading and watching TV. One night they were watching Saturday Night Live where Andy Kaufman did an impersonation of Elvis. She says, quote, peering over the top of his reading glasses, Elvis addressed Andy on the television screen. He said, "You better get it right, son." She says Elvis thought that Andy did an all right job. I had no idea Elvis needed reading glasses. Anyway, Ginger says when she wasn't at Graceland, she would talk with Elvis on the phone twice a day before falling asleep and then after waking up. She was more comfortable calling him now, but usually waited for him to call first. Ginger says she also began telling Elvis, "I love you" on the phone, which was a big step for her because she didn't grow up saying "I love you" in the family. She says, quote, "However, if I didn't tell Elvis I loved him first, he usually asked me if I did." So she doesn't say if he would say "I love you" back to her. Ginger says during her time at Graceland, she began getting to know Elvis's extended family and his friends, though some of their roles were unclear to her. She says his cousin Billy Smith didn't seem to have a formal job. He was simply always around to do whatever Elvis needed. And Billy was the son of Travis, the Graceland guard who had known her father, though Travis had passed away since. Billy shared with her a story once. He said before Elvis met Ginger, Elvis told him, "There must be someone out there for me." She says this made her feel good because she was certain they were meant to be together. Billy's wife, Jo, occasionally visited Graceland with him. Jo usually wore black, and with her pale skin, dark eyes, and black hair, Elvis jokingly called her his, quote, assassin, and the two often exchanged playful, knowing looks. Jo had been in Elvis's life for many years, and although she and Ginger were always friendly, they never spent enough time alone to grow close. Ginger says George Klein stopped by occasionally and was always kind. Vernon would also appear from time to time. When he and Elvis needed to discuss business privately, they would ask her to step out and then return afterward, which she understood and she didn't mind. Ginger says during one of the visits, Elvis asked Vernon, "Doesn't Ginger look a little like Mama when she was young?" And Vernon said, "Yes," after thinking a moment. Ginger says it seemed Elvis occasionally needed a retreat and he found his bathroom suite to be his sanctuary. And this was true for his bathroom at Graceland and when he was in Vegas. She says, quote, every once in a while before stepping into his bathroom, Elvis would announce, "I'm going to meditate and clear my mind." Ginger says one day while they were lounging in the bedroom, Elvis said, "Would you like to move in?" She was very flattered by Elvis's unexpected invitation to move into Graceland, knowing many women would dream of it. But she says despite loving him and imagining a future together, her conservative upbringing made living with someone before marriage feel wrong, and that even traveling with Elvis already felt like a big step, and she didn't take such choices lightly. She told him nervously, "Elvis, it just isn't my way." She was hoping he would understand. She says Elvis accepted her answer and smiled and said, "Fine, I respect you for that." On January 18th, Ginger and Rosemary planned to see a movie near Graceland. And she briefly thought about inviting Elvis, but decided it wasn't practical, assuming he was still sleeping and remembering that he usually rented entire theaters for privacy. Before they left, she told her mom that if Elvis called to let him know they went to see a movie. Ginger says as they arrived at the movie theater, Elvis's aide, Steve Smith, stopped them, saying Elvis wanted them to skip the movie and go shopping for Ginger's family instead. Ginger was puzzled and wondered if Elvis didn't want her going to a movie without him. She says she felt torn and put on the spot. She didn't want to ditch her plans with Rosemary, and she appreciated Elvis's generosity toward her family, but she knew he didn't need to buy them more gifts. Steve was standing there waiting for Ginger to comply, and she felt Elvis would be offended if she said no to his generosity. And Rosemary said she didn't mind seeing the movie another time, so they both followed Steve to Goldsmith's department store. At the store, Steve explained that Elvis wanted them to buy mink coats for their families and for themselves, even though Ginger already had coats from him. Knowing Elvis, she chose one so he wouldn't insist they return to the store for mink coats. She picked minks for her mother, Terry, her sister-in-law, and a simple black one for herself. Rosemary initially chose a cheaper fox coat, but after Steve checked with Elvis on the phone, she was told only minks. She selected a mink coat too. They then brought all the coats back to Graceland and laid them out in front of Elvis. He approved of the purchases and then said, "There isn't one for your father or brother." He pulled a sheepskin coat and a mink coat from his closet and laid them on the bed next to the other coats. Ginger says Elvis put on a loose blue jumpsuit over his pajamas, fastened a studded black belt, and slipped into shiny black boots and tucked his Magnum 57 into the belt. He said, "Let's go to your house." Ginger called her parents to let them know that they were coming, and then an aide loaded the coats into the studs. Elvis drove while she and Rosemary rode with him, followed by bodyguards in another car. As they traveled down the dark rural rural road near her home, Elvis mentioned he'd noticed a car tailing them for some time. Its headlights were visible behind the bodyguard's vehicle. Elvis abruptly pulled over. As the bodyguards and the other car stopped behind him, he jumped out and approached the stranger before anyone could intervene. Ginger and Rosemary watched nervously until the man, holding only a pen and paper, asked for an autograph. Elvis signed it politely and returned to the car. Rosemary asked him, "Aren't you afraid to do that?" And Elvis pointed to the gun tucked in his belt and said, "Why do you think I carry this?" Back at her family's home, everyone thanked him for the codes. Elvis asked Terry to play something on the piano, so she played Toccata by Aram Khachaturian. Khachaturian. When she was done, he sat next to her on the bench and played and sang Unchained Melody. Ginger says she loved watching him in her home having a good time with her family. The following night, Elvis invited Ginger, Rosemary, and Terry to stay at Graceland. Terry was out, but Rosemary agreed. And because Elvis didn't want Ginger driving after dark, he sent someone to pick them up. Elvis and Rosemary had grown close enough to joke around easily, while Ginger was more reserved. Later, as the three sat watching TV in his bedroom, Elvis made a playful off-color remark. She doesn't say exactly what he said, but I'm very, very curious. Rosemary said to him, "Could you imagine if you acted like that in some of your movies?" Then they proceeded to share silly movie plots where Elvis's character is increasingly outlandish. During their conversation, Elvis learned Rosemary was single. He asked who she would go out with if she could pick anyone, and she told him Burt Reynolds. Elvis winked and said, "That can be arranged, you know." Rosemary, who Ginger describes as a woman of many words, was speechless. Ginger says they watched Monty Python and the Holy Grail and then went to sleep. Elvis told Rosemary she could sleep on the bed in his dressing room, in his dressing closet in his bathroom. Later that afternoon, Elvis and his aide Steve drove Ginger and Rosemary back home. When they pulled up, Elvis noticed there was some dust on the car that he had given her and told her she shouldn't let it get dirty. Ginger says after that she would wash her car in the driveway before driving it to Graceland. At her parents' house, Elvis asked to see the family Bible again. He pointed out new observations, broke down the word Genesis as Genes is. He also took notes, underlined verses, and shared his interpretations with them. Elvis sent Steve to pick up McDonald's, and they ate in the den. Ginger says while they ate, Elvis brought up with her parents having Ginger move closer to Graceland. He said, quote, "I'm worried about Ginger driving back and forth to see me, and I'd like her to have her own room and phone." And then he added, "As you get older, you don't need the burden of a house note hanging over your heads. You should be able to retire, play golf, or do whatever you want. I'd like you to look for a house close to Graceland." Ginger says her parents were taken aback by Elvis's offer and thanked him politely. Even though he was enthusiastic, the idea felt unreal to them. They had spent their lives working for their modest home and were used to Elvis's extravagant world of spontaneous luxury purchases. Ginger says her parents' marital tensions were still ongoing and it affected the whole family, but she kept these struggles private and hoped things would eventually get better. It was late and Elvis said he wanted to spend the night at her family's home, which touched her, but also worried her family about where he would sleep. Ginger says the only large bed was in the room she shared with Terry, which still had a sheet pinned up as a temporary curtain. Thankfully, Rosemary stepped in and offered him her room. Elvis looked at the size of Rosemary's bed and said it would be too short for him. And then, noticing her television, asked what kind it was. She said, "It's a good one," and she turned it on. It was a black and white TV, and Elvis told her, "You need a color one." Ginger says despite the embarrassment of having a sheet as a window covering, Elvis would sleep in Ginger and Terry's room, and Terry would sleep with Rosemary. A while later, the doorbell rang. It was Al, and he was on the porch holding a brand new color TV. Ginger says this explained why Steve used their phone earlier to make a call. They placed the TV in Rosemary's room, and she thanked him for his generosity. Ginger says, Quote, as everyone grew tired, my mother brought out a blanket for Steve, who said he'd sleep in the recliner. My mother said goodnight to us, and when she left the room, I knew she felt as I did, that she could trust Elvis as a gentleman and that I would never engage in anything inappropriate under my parents' roof. Ginger says it still felt awkward sleeping with Elvis under her parents' roof, though. So this part is interesting because I would imagine sleeping at Ginger's house, Elvis would not have taken a sleep packet that night unless they kept emergency sleep packets like on them or in their car. Anyway, Ginger says when they woke up later that day, Elvis said he had a Nashville recording session and wanted her to join him. As she packed, he told her family it had been a long time since he'd spent the night in anyone else's home. He said, quote, I feel like I have a family because you're as nutty as I am and I feel no jealousy here. Ginger wasn't sure what he meant by jealousy, but she suspected Elvis might have sensed jealousy or tension among people at Graceland. And she never asked what he meant. She was simply grateful that he felt at ease in her home. In Nashville, Ginger stayed in her hotel suite's bedroom while Elvis rehearsed, but he soon came in saying his throat was sore. It was a worry that always upset him. Ginger says she didn't know the stakes of the recording session, only that his vocal quality mattered deeply to him. After consulting his staff and seeing a doctor, Elvis spent a couple of days resting with her, ultimately canceling the session because he wouldn't record unless his voice was perfect. They returned to Memphis, and with a few weeks before the next tour, she hoped he'd fully recover. That's it for chapter 16. Stay tuned for chapter 17. This is where Elvis is going to go house shopping with Ginger and her mom, and he proposes to Ginger. I'll see you then.